My name is Naomi Reyes, and I'm 33 years old. I'm a civil engineer in Austin. My job is to keep structures upright, to make sure forces and load paths behave. I'm trained to spot hairline fractures before they become failures. Somehow I missed the one that mattered. We were at Jeffrey's, 12 of us, the kind of dinner that hums with quiet money and careful manners. My parents were glowing, relieved that the hard parts of life, rent, laundry, are you eating, had finally surrendered to the soft certainty of she's getting married. Across the table sat Sloane's parents. Greg, retired attorney in a tie that looked like a closing argument, and Elaine, therapist with a luminous smile and a blog about evolved relationships. Sloane squeezed my hand under the table. He'd chosen the private room, the tasting menu, the wine pairing that tasted like lake water and smoke. We were halfway through entrees when Sloane slid something toward me. Glossy cover, color-coded tabs, professional binding. The title stopped air in my throat. Family of Choice Agreement. I almost laughed. I thought he was teasing me about my love of binders and site plans, but the room sharpened into silence. Greg's chin lifted. Elaine's hands folded, devout. Sloane was watching me with the careful gaze of someone waiting to see if a fuse catches. Go ahead, he said softly. See what speaks to you. I opened it. Section headers leapt like neon. Holidays and life events, godparent advisement, creative direction, and family brand. My brain stumbled on the word brand. On page 3, a clause named Maya Lopez, Sloane's ex-girlfriend, as a permanent family member post-marriage. She would be invited to all holidays, birthdays, major milestones, and, this part was highlighted, would serve as creative advisor for our wedding brand campaign. Our what? I said. The word broke in the air like thin glass. Elaine tilted her head, compassionate. Sweetheart, every couple is a narrative. The question is whether you're authoring it with intention. Sloane's thumb traced circles on the tablecloth. Babe, Maya understands my image, our image, in a way no one else does. She was formative. This is about honoring the architecture of my life, of our life. The word architecture landed where it wasn't invited. I kept reading. There was an addendum earmarking Maya as a godparent advisor for hypothetical children, an outline of family branding pillars, and a calendar granting Maya standing invitations. It wasn't a love letter. It was a schematic for a triangle. Across from me, my mom had stopped breathing. My dad stared at his water like the answer was floating there. Greg's lips pulled into the almost smile of a man who brings form contracts to birthday parties. I looked at Sloane. He was beautiful, maddeningly composed, the kind of man who could talk a storm into sitting. This is non-negotiable, he said, voice gentle, like a doctor telling you the bone never healed right. Maya has been in my life longer than you have. She stays, or we end this here. I didn't feel heat. I felt geometry, angles clicking into place. Moments earlier, I'd been someone's fiancé. Now I was a stakeholder. Elaine reached across the table, palms up. We're expanding, not replacing. Our culture is so impoverished about continuity. Let's model something fuller. Greg nodded. It's all drafted to avoid ambiguity. Clarity is kindness. A server hovered at my shoulder, then vanished, with the good sense of a man who'd seen 1,000 small wars. I closed the packet. I placed it beside my plate like a napkin I didn't need. Understood, I said. Sloane blinked, relief softening his eyes, as if I'd just stepped onto his side of the river. You do? I do. I pushed back my chair. Thank you for dinner. Naomi, Sloane started, a hand half raised. I stood. I did not raise my voice or collect arguments. I didn't offer a thesis on romantic primacy or discuss the ethics of treating ex-lovers like legacy software. I simply left. The hallway was cool and smelled faintly of lemon and money. My palms were dry. My heart was distant, like a radio in another room. I walked to the parking lot under a sky so clean it felt like the city had been pressure washed. Inside my car, I sat with my phone. For a moment, a tremor tried to start. I didn't let it. When someone hands you a contract for your future children at your engagement dinner, I thought, they're planning a merger, not a marriage. I forwarded the PDF to Tessa Liu, subject line, "You're going to want to read this." She called 6 minutes later. "Tell me everything," she said, not unkindly. Behind her voice, I heard keyboards, fluorescent lights, the pre-storm hush of a corporate floor at 9:30 p.m. I told her, Jeffries, the packet, The clause about Maya, the ultimatum, the way Sloan said non-negotiable like a lullaby. Tessa inhaled. Okay, we're documenting everything starting now. Screenshots, scans, any messages. Do not respond to provocation. Lock down your accounts tonight. Credit cards, shared registries, utilities, Wi-Fi, change passwords, remove access, screenshot the before and after. I don't want to hurt him, I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. You're not hurting him, Tessa said. You're acknowledging reality. This is a consent issue disguised as progressive rhetoric. I stared at the steering wheel. A tiny nick on the leather stared back. It belonged to no one and told the truth anyway. Naomi, Tessa added, softer, you don't have to litigate your boundaries. You just have to keep them. I went home. I changed passwords. I revoked access to my credit card and registry accounts. I took pictures of each screen before and after, my thumb hovering in each frame like a witness. I forwarded everything to a new folder and named it Foundations. Engineers have superstitions too. Texts from Sloan began to populate my lock screen like hail. Sloan. That was cruel. You embarrassed my family. Sloan. You misunderstood. It's about honoring continuity. Sloan. We can talk in the morning, okay? Don't do anything dramatic. Sloan. Mom says you're triggered by old-fashioned binaries. That's fine. We can work through it. I set the phone on Do Not Disturb. I brewed tea. I wouldn't drink. In the quiet, the condo felt like a blueprint I suddenly never signed. An email hit at 9:12 p.m. from Greg Carter. Subject, Addendum to Prenup Draft. I opened it because I have that flaw. I like to look a bomb in the eye. The addendum listed Maya as godparent advisor for family branding and child-raising decisions. It used a tone both paternal and slick, the voice of a man who writes the law, then acts surprised when you don't like living in it. I forwarded it to Tessa without commentary. Then I typed and deleted 12 different replies to Sloan before typing nothing at all. At midnight, Elaine posted a blog entry. When partners fear your freedom, no names, plenty of light-washed stock photos of hands almost touching. Lines like, some people are so threatened by expansive love they'd rather amputate than integrate. Friends sent me screenshots, wondering if I'd seen. I stared until the screen blurred and the words turned into rectangles. At 12:38, my doorbell rang. I stood in the darkness, unlit. The bell rang again, then stopped. My phone buzzed once more. Sloan, I'm outside. Just come down and we can reset this. I watched the ... of his typing reappear, vanish, reappear, a heartbeat trying to convince itself to continue. I did not go downstairs. Instead, I opened notes and wrote one sentence. Public ultimatums only work on people afraid to lose you. I saved it. I brushed my teeth. I lay in bed and thought of trusses and tensile strength, and the way you learn, early, that sometimes the most merciful thing you can do to a failing structure is take your hands away. In the morning, I told myself, I would return keys and rings and whatever symbols made other people feel safer than truth. In the morning, I would ask Tessa to come with me to a bank, to HR, to wherever reality needed notarizing. For now, I slept without dreaming. Or if I dreamed, I don't remember. All I recall is the feeling you get when you finally stop arguing with gravity. Morning made everything look ordinary, which was impolite of it. I woke to the pale square of light that always lands on my dresser at 7:10 and the hum of the AC unit kicking on like a dependable old friend. For 3 long breaths, I floated in the muscle memory of a life that hadn't yet cracked. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a reminder from the bank about a balance threshold I didn't remember setting. The ordinary peeled away. I brewed coffee like it could file motions. I set my laptop on the kitchen island, opened a new folder called Foundations, Day 1, and started doing the thing I am good at, sorting load from noise. First, passwords. I cycled through everything. Registry, utilities, shared streaming accounts, the condo Wi-Fi. I revoked Sloan's access and screenshotted every step like a tourist photographing exits. My hands were steady, which felt cruel to the version of me who had cried in cars after gentler betrayals. I sent the screenshots to Tessa with short captions. Registry, access removed. Utilities, PW changed. Wi-Fi, done. Her replies came like sonar pings. Save everything to the folder. Timestamp your notes. You're doing well. Next, the credit card. I scrolled the last 90 days and felt the air tilt. There were charges we'd agreed upon: deposits for venue holds, a bakery tasting, a refundable tux appointment for Sloan that still felt like a dare. But threaded through were strangers. Serene Springs Spa Weekend, $1,150. All Right Rentals, $680. Mood Board Studio, Creative Suite, $975. And my chest tightened, Lopez Studio, Creative Direction Retainer, $3,400. Maya's last name sat on my statement like a watermark. I pulled our written agreement from an email I'd labeled Expectations, Wedding. Back when I still thought good faith could be documented, we had set a simple boundary. Charges go only to agreed vendors. Personal or image-related expenses are separate. I highlighted each violation, exported the file as a PDF, and forwarded it to Tessa with the subject line, Breach, Card. My phone vibrated again. HR. Confidential inquiry. The sender was our generalist, polite to a fault. The email asked for a quick chat regarding an anonymous concern about my emotional stability and ability to collaborate under stress. It was the kind of sentence that pretends to care while holding a scalpel behind its back. I stared at the words until they lost their teeth. Then I called Tessa. "Send it to me," she said, voice clipped, awake. "Forward it to your friend Miguel in IT, too. Ask him to trace the IP if he can. Do not reply to HR yet." By 9:20, Miguel had called me back, whispering like a boy at a sleepover. "Naomi, I shouldn't say this, but..." He paused. The email came from a private domain tied to Carter Integrative Therapy, Elaine's practice. The associated IP resolves to their office suite. I pressed the phone between ear and shoulder, typing as he spoke. "Can you send me a screenshot of the trace?" He exhaled. "I'll get you a sanitized capture. Off the record, okay?" "Off the record," I promised, knowing records are exactly what save you. I set up a 1 p.m. with HR and walked into that meeting with a binder I made in 30 minutes because grief is a project, and I happen to be a terrifying project manager. I handed over a calm timeline. The dinner, the packet, Sloane's texts, Greg's addendum, Elaine's blog post, the charges, Miguel's IP trace. I kept my voice even. Engineers know that panic is loud, but math is patient. The HR generalist scanned, nodded, and typed. "Thank you, Naomi. We'll look into the anonymous complaint. Based on what you've shared, it appears you're addressing a personal matter responsibly." It should have felt like oxygen. Instead, it felt like a floor laid level under a house already leaning. By late afternoon, a new email pinged my inbox. Vendor packet. Counter signatures. I opened the attachments and felt the strangest combination of relief and rage. Every single wedding contract, venue, catering, floral, quartet, transportation, listed Elaine Whitaker as the sole signer. Total commitments, $145,000. My name appeared nowhere. I was a bride the way a mascot is a team. I forwarded the entire package to Tessa. She called almost immediately, laughter in her throat, not unkind. "This is a business event masquerading as a wedding," she said. "And the liability is neatly tied to Elaine. If they try to tag you for anything, this document is a Kevlar vest." "Then why do I feel exposed?" I asked. "Because you loved him," she said, as if answering the simplest equation. At 6:02 p.m., my screen lit with a name I didn't expect. Rachel Lane, Sloane's college roommate, stylist, kind to a fault when we met. The way some people are after they've learned kindness is more strategic than cruelty. Her text appeared as if it had been waiting. "Rachel, I'm sorry. You don't know me well, but I know enough to be ashamed. Check your email in 5. Don't reply here." 5 minutes later, an email slid in with the subject line, "You should have the truth." Inside were screenshots of a group chat between Sloane, Elaine, and Maya, dated the week before Jeffries. The messages were the choreography behind my humiliation. Sloane, "We need the script tight. I'll slide the doc after entrees." Elaine, "Language must emphasize expansion and fear of regression. I'll have Greg ready with addendum." Maya, "I'll be there in spirit. Make sure family brand is in the headline. If she balks, it plays as controlling. Good optics." I read the thread twice, then a third time, until the words felt like cardboard. There was even a rehearsal line for the sentence that would end us, "Non-Negotiable." They had practiced it like dialogue. I called Tessa and sent the screenshots as we spoke. Perfect, she said, an edge of steel under the word. Premeditation. Keep these sealed for now. Metadata intact. We'll decide when to lay them down. I stood at the window and watched dusk dissolve the buildings across the street into kinder shapes. Somewhere below, a couple laughed like they were being paid for it. Over my neighbor's balcony, a plant hung heavy with the kind of flowers that look like trumpets and act like lullabies. Sloan was calling. I let it go to voicemail. His voice arrived seconds later, smooth and wounded. Naomi, this is spiraling. You're making private things public and involving lawyers when all I asked for was respect for the history that formed me. Your line last night, walking out. That was cruel. You embarrassed my parents. You humiliated me. Maya isn't competition. She's continuity. If you can't hold that, what does that say about your capacity for love? He paused, as if expecting me to fill the silence with an apology to prove I was still auditioning. I'm at my parents' tonight, he continued gently. Let's meet tomorrow and reset expectations. We can compromise. He hung up before he could hear me not answer. I opened the family of choice agreement again and studied it with the cold respect I give to faulty beam calculations. Somewhere in the clauses, the word compromise had been replaced by capitulation, and they thought I wouldn't notice. At 9:47 p.m., Elaine posted again, a photo of interlaced hands over a dinner plate captioned, "When fear meets abundance, only one can stay." Her commenters, an army of avatars named after herbs and goddesses, cheered. I wondered how many of them loved anyone enough to stop monetizing for a day. Miguel texted the sanitized IP capture at 10:02. I slid it into Foundations, day 1, and sent a copy to Tessa. She replied with a single sentence. Tomorrow we pull the card statements in person. Bank at 10. Bring ID and your spine. I laughed, startled by the sound. I did as I was told, with the same devotion I give to load tables. I stacked today's printouts in a neat pile, clipped them, labeled them. On the top page, above a column of numbers that tried to look innocent, I wrote, Structural Failures, Phase 1. Before bed, Rachel messaged again. Rachel, there's something else. Not safe to send tonight. It's bigger than a dinner stunt. Me, is this about the family brand thing? Rachel, yes and no. It's a deck, a full pitch. You're not a fiancé in it. You're a role. I'll figure out how to get it to you. I stared at the 3 bubbles as they appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Rachel, I'm sorry, Naomi. I thought it was performative growth. It's something else. I lay down and turned off the lamp. The condo exhaled. Far off, a siren moved through the city like a seam ripper. I let my eyes adjust to the dark and thought of the first lesson my mentor taught me. If a structure is carrying loads, it was never designed to carry. It's not noble. It's failing. Maybe love is the same. Maybe some loads shouldn't be asked, and some asks shouldn't be loved. In the morning, we'd go to the bank. We'd dispute charges. We'd notarize reality. And if Rachel's something else was what I suspected, if this wasn't just a personal mess but a business model, I would stop waiting to be reasonable about people treating me unreasonable. I set my phone face down and said out loud to the empty room, "No" is a complete sentence. The room, mercifully, said nothing back. By the time the so-called neutral meeting was scheduled, 2 weeks had passed. 2 weeks of silence punctured only by legal emails and the occasional midnight text from Sloan that started with, "Please, just hear me out," and ended with, "You're making this uglier than it needs to be." Greg chose a community center downtown. Neutral territory, he called it. The kind of sterile space that smells like cleaning solution and regret. Both families attended. Tessa came with me, armed with a binder thick enough to be a threat. I wore black, not for mourning, but because I wanted no color for them to project meaning onto. Elaine greeted me first, voice lilting like nothing had happened. "Naomi, sweetheart, you look tired. This whole conflict has been so draining for all of us." "All of us?" I asked quietly. Interesting phrasing. Sloan stood behind her, hair perfect, expression rehearsed. I could tell he'd been coached. Greg clapped his hands once, like starting a presentation. "Let's begin. The goal today is to find middle ground. We're all reasonable people." Tessa's tone was dry as dust. "We'll see." Sloan cleared his throat and began with the gravity of a man pitching investors. "I want to start by acknowledging Naomi's feelings. I understand how the agreement might have seemed unorthodox. Unorthodox, as if what he'd done was a quirky dinner experiment gone slightly off recipe. But I also think, he continued, that there's room for compromise. Maya doesn't have to be present at every family holiday. She can step back, but she still needs to retain creative authority over our shared image as a couple. That's non-negotiable. Creative authority? I repeated. Over my life? Sloane smiled the way a salesman does when he's certain the deal will close. You're part of something larger, Naomi. We can redefine what family means. You can be the face of a new kind of partnership. Modern, integrated, progressive. Elaine nodded fervently. Exactly. Imagine the visibility this could bring you. You'd be a pioneer. Tessa closed her binder with a deliberate snap. Visibility is a funny word when you're being used as a brand asset. Greg's lawyerly voice cut in, sharp as a paper edge. Let's keep this civil. Civil, Tessa said evenly, is relative to who's holding the knife. The air thinned. I could feel everyone waiting for the explosion. I didn't give them one. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the projector I'd brought, a small, neat device the size of a sandwich. I'd like to share something, I said. Sloane frowned. Naomi, this isn't... But I'd already connected my phone. The wall lit up with screenshots. First, the group chat between him, Elaine, and Maya, plotting the dinner at Jeffrey's. Then, the credit card statements showing unauthorized charges. Next, Greg's prenup addendum, naming Maya as godparent advisor. Each slide landed like a hammer wrapped in silk. Elaine's hands trembled. Where did you get this? From someone with a conscience, I said. Greg's voice rose an octave. The Whitakers do not tolerate defamation. Tessa leaned forward, her tone precise as a scalpel. Defamation requires falsehood. We have receipts. The room went very, very still. Elaine began to cry softly, the practiced tears of someone who's learned they often work. We just wanted to create a new model for love, she said, one that wasn't built on fear. You're destroying something beautiful because you're threatened by evolution. I unplugged the projector. If evolution means handing my life over to your ex, call me prehistoric. Sloane's jaw clenched. You're twisting this. Maya was part of my foundation. Then build with her, I said, but stop pretending I'm the blueprint. The meeting disintegrated after that. Greg accused me of manipulation. Elaine sobbed. My parents stood behind me silently, as if afraid any movement might cause collapse. When it became clear nothing productive was happening, Tessa gathered our documents, thanked the group with polite finality, and we left. In the car, I expected relief. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all my anger and replaced it with static. Tessa broke the silence first. That was necessary, she said, but it's not over. I glanced at her. You think they'll retaliate? They already have. She pointed to my phone. Check your inbox. Sure enough, an email had arrived mid-meeting. Subject, intent to sue, emotional distress. I laughed once, quietly. They're suing me for walking away? Tessa smirked. Let them try. I've already drafted your counterclaim. It's airtight. That night, I received another message. This one from Rachel. Rachel, you should see what I found. Attached was a PDF, 42 slides long. Title page, The Modern Family Brand. Turning Love into Legacy. I opened it and the breath left my body. The deck was a business plan, not a metaphor, a literal pitch. It outlined revenue streams, marketing partnerships, influencer deals. The central premise, a redefinition of love through visibility and inclusion. There were mock-ups of social media campaigns featuring me and Sloane, except my name wasn't listed, just the partner. My face was blurred in concept art, a placeholder for the traditional archetype learning to evolve. Projected profits, $250K in the first year through speaking engagements and sponsorships. Maya was listed as creative director, emotional architecture. Elaine was credited as head of strategy. Sloane, lead talent and brand visionary. And me, traditional partner, reclamation arc. I scrolled, numb. The narrative arc was clear. I was meant to be the example, the woman who learns to accept her partner's expanded family and celebrates co-parenting emotional continuity. The deck ended with the tagline, Love that transcends labels. The future of family is now. I forwarded the file to Tessa, adding only 3 words. You were right. Her reply came minutes later. Tessa, 2 options, public exposure or quiet destruction. You choose. I stared at the screen. Public exposure would mean spectacle, headlines, viral threads, Humiliation in reverse. Quiet destruction meant silence, patience, strategy. For the first time in months, I smiled. Let it rot, I murmured, from the inside. That night, I closed all the blinds and sat on the floor with the projector still in its case. I thought about the phrase family of choice, how it was supposed to sound warm and liberating, how, in the wrong hands, it became a leash disguised as a ribbon. They'd wanted to turn my marriage into content, my boundaries into a brand, my consent into currency. But I wasn't their product. I was the variable they hadn't accounted for, the quiet one who documents everything and waits until the math runs out of room to lie. Tomorrow, the fallout would begin, and I would not say a single word. The first 24 hours after the pitch deck revelation felt like standing inside a quiet avalanche, everything technically still, but the air too heavy to trust. Tessa called it containment mode. I called it breathing. We decided no public statements, no confrontation, just documentation. Let them move first. By Monday morning, the ripples had already begun. Elaine's blog post from last week, "When Partners Fear Your Freedom," had somehow gone viral, ironically. Comment sections were split, half praising her bravery, half asking whether she was the same therapist whose future son-in-law had walked out over an ex-involvement clause. Tessa's voice over the phone was cool and precise. Let them talk. Every word tightens their own noose. Then she added, "Also, congratulations. The bank dispute on your card was approved. Charges frozen pending investigation." I smiled for the first time in days. So the mood board spa weekend was officially not a business expense? Not unless you start billing self-respect as a deductible, she said dryly. That afternoon, Sloan called. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail anyway. "Naomi, you're weaponizing your silence. You know that, right? I've been trying to reach you to make this better. Maya's devastated. My mom's under attack online. You could end all this with one post. Just say this was a misunderstanding. We can rebuild from that." Weaponizing silence. The phrase almost made me laugh. I texted Tessa the recording. Her response, "Perfect. Admission of ongoing pressure. Save it." 2 days later, Elaine posted another blog entry. "The myth of the regressive fiancé." It was thinner this time, defensive, almost trembling in tone. People noticed. The comments turned. Someone leaked screenshots of her family of choice contract, probably Rachel, though she never said so directly. Within hours, influencer forums were dissecting every clause. The backlash was merciless. Therapist monetizes daughter's relationship for brand, trended briefly on Twitter. Tessa called it poetic justice. I called it Tuesday. By Friday, Greg's email arrived. Formal notice of intent to pursue legal remedy for public humiliation and emotional contract breach. An emotional contract. They'd actually written those words. I forwarded it to Tessa. Her response came back almost instantly. Subject, emotional contract. Naomi, I just laughed loud enough to startle my intern. We're filing a preemptive cease and desist and attaching an anti-slap counter. Also, I'm adding a timeline of every provable action they've taken. The staged dinner, the harassment emails, the IP-traced HR complaint, the pitch deck. Their case will last 5 minutes in court and 2 years in therapy. I laughed then too, but it came out sounding like relief disguised as disbelief. Around that time, small cracks started forming in their side of the wall. Elaine's professional ethics board opened a review, apparently triggered by anonymous complaints about her mixing clinical practice with personal branding. Greg withdrew from a consulting case after a client cited conflict of interest. Maya's photography studio lost 2 major sponsors when screenshots of the pitch deck quietly circulated through Austin's creative community. As for Sloan, his follower count barely dipped, but the comments told the story. Bro, she left you for a reason. Stop selling enlightenment. Start buying accountability. He posted a photo of himself meditating in the desert. Caption, learning to love even those who misunderstand you. It got 3,000 likes and 1 blocked comment from me. Learning to manipulate the word love into a business model. Tessa called a minute later. Delete that. We're playing the long game. I already did, I said. And I had. Silence was more elegant. A week later, Rachel reached out again. Rachel, they're cracking. Maya's furious with Elaine. She said the pitch deck wasn't supposed to leak this early. Me. This early? Rachel. Yeah, they had a rollout plan. Podcast tour. Book proposal. They were going to drop it right after your wedding. The working title was Building Beyond Boundaries. I stared at the text. They were going to launch a book about my wedding? About their emotional evolution, Rachel said, voice shaking. You were just the proof of concept. I wanted to scream, but instead I took a breath and wrote the words that had become my mantra. Document. Don't react. Then came the night I realized it was over. Not legally yet, but spiritually. Tessa called late, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. They've gone quiet, she said. No filings, no emails. Greg's lawyer reached out off record. They want to discuss settlement. Already? They're scared, she said simply. Silence worked. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Silence isn't weakness. It's gravity. It doesn't chase. It pulls. They wanted me loud and defensive, the villain in their narrative. Instead, I'd given them nothing to push against, and their empire of rhetoric collapsed under its own echo. The next morning, I went for a walk by Lady Bird Lake. The air was wet with that early Texas humidity that makes everything feel too real. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like evidence. I felt like a person. Somewhere across town, Sloan was probably refreshing his notifications, waiting for a reaction that would never come. I picked up a small, smooth stone, turned it over in my hand, and let it fall back into the water. Every ripple vanished within seconds. Let it rot, I whispered to myself, smiling faintly from the inside. The wind carried it away. 3 months later, the word mediation stopped sounding like something that belonged to other people's divorces. It was just Thursday. The conference room was beige and windowless, neutral ground again, though by now everyone knew neutrality only meant whoever had less to lose. At one end sat Greg and Elaine, polished but wilted. Sloan beside them, immaculate in navy, tapping a pen like he could write himself a new ending. Across from them, Tessa adjusted her blazer with surgeon-level calm. I took the chair beside her, the quiet side of the table. A mediator cleared his throat, said things about mutual understanding and reestablishing closure. His voice carried the faint exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many families treat love like a business dispute. Greg began. Naomi, we recognize mistakes were made in communication, he said, reading from notes. But the online narrative has unfairly damaged our reputations. We're here to find a path that protects everyone's interests. Elaine nodded, eyes glistening. I still believe this could have been a beautiful partnership, she said softly. We just wanted to show the world love could evolve. Sloan spoke last, the faintest tremor in his voice. You were supposed to be part of something extraordinary, Naomi. You walked away before the work was finished. I didn't answer. Tessa did. She slid a slim folder across the table. Inside are time-stamped communications, invoices, traced IPs, and the pitch deck outlining plans to monetize Ms. Reyes's relationship without consent. The mediator flipped through a few pages, face paling. When he reached the slide labeled Traditional Partner, Reclamation Arc, he stopped reading aloud. You could hear the clock in the hallway, Elaine whispered. This isn't what it looks like. Tessa met her eyes. It looks like exploitation wearing enlightenment. Greg started to argue, but his voice cracked halfway through the word defamation. The mediator cleared his throat again. I think it's best if we discuss settlement terms. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized. The Whitakers accepted full financial liability for every vendor contract. They signed a binding non-disparagement clause and agreed to withdraw all legal threats. Sloan signed a no-contact agreement. Maya signed a cease and desist barring her from using my name, likeness, or emotional narrative in her business promotions. Tessa called it a surgical victory. I called it air. In the weeks that followed, the ripples kept spreading. Elaine announced a personal hiatus from her practice after the ethics board opened a formal review. Greg retired early. His firm issued a short statement citing family priorities. Maya rebranded her photography page with the caption, Rebuilding with Honesty, and quietly moved to Denver. Sloan posted less. When he did, his captions were essays about forgiveness that sounded like apologies written for an audience. Tessa warned me not to gloat online, so I didn't. Instead, I worked. My affordable housing project, Eastside Infill, was approved for a city grant. I threw myself into deadlines, site visits, late nights of drafting, and recalculating load ratios. The numbers stayed true even when people didn't. When the email came confirming the funding, I cried for exactly 43 seconds, then bought a plant I couldn't name and set it by the window. Somewhere in that slow return to normal, I met Harris. an environmental architect consulting on green drainage systems. We met over bad coffee at a volunteer build. No cinematic spark, no flood of violins, just ease. He asked, "So, what do you design?" "Stability," I said. He smiled like he understood that wasn't a metaphor. A year after the engagement dinner, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new community playground. Kids were shrieking joyfully. Sunlight glinted off the fresh paint of the slides. A volunteer handed me a wrench for final adjustments. My phone buzzed. Bank notification. Case closed. No impact to credit rating. I exhaled. A journalist asked if I wanted to be in the photo for the paper. I shook my head. I'm good being behind the camera this time. She laughed. You sure? This project's a big deal. Public ultimatums only work on people afraid to lose something, I said quietly. I stopped being afraid. That night, sitting on my porch under the Texas stars, I reread the first note I'd written months ago in my phone. Never negotiate with someone who doesn't respect your right to say no. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It was calibration, an equation balanced at last. If someone asks you to accept unacceptable terms, they're showing you exactly who they are. Believe them the first time. Walk away the second. Build something stronger the third. Because some foundations are meant to hold weight, and some are only meant to teach you where to never build again.